This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule. Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by someone that feels like an old friend, Abby Ellsworth. Thanks for coming on, Abby, the host and the founder of On Being a Police Officer podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Great to see you.
Yeah.
It's been, I think, 2 years since I did your interview, or a year and a half.
Yeah, it was a bit since you did the interview, which I have to say, I shared that out a ton when you put it out. And a lot of it because I feel in some ways it was one of the best interviews, if not the best interview that someone's done of me. A few reasons. Because of your candor and your flow and how you approach interviews, and something that I'm trying to continually improve on as I listen to my backlog and archives. I'm like, ooh, that was really clunky. But as well as I suppose how you put it all together, and you're an editing wizard, because I was like, there's no way I sound that good, but you put a lot of time into it. So I really appreciate that storytelling that you're able to do.
And we really connected too. We did a little advanced prep. I knew a lot about you from Blue Grit Wellness, your podcast, your Instagram, but there were some surprises, and we connected on some emotional things, and I get choked up just thinking about it. There were some anniversaries for you right around that time. It's sort of kind of what the podcast is. It's kind of a journey through someone's story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the project, and I've listened to several, some local around me and some all over the place. And so, yeah, it's been a very, I suppose, a meaningful experience to be featured amongst your array of people, as well as just to get to know you better. And it's been really cool just to kind of talk and get a little bit of mentorship on the podcast journey and that whole project from you as well.
Well, now I need advice from you. The mentee has surpassed the mentor.
No, here's what I think it is. I think it's you curate a product, and then I've shared this before, but my tendency, especially growing up and starting the career, was paralysis by analysis. And so there's so much of me that I'm very uncomfortable, but I have forced myself in a way to literally push past that and just put it out. Sometimes, as you kind of already illustrated, this can be such a process. You can do research, and I've heard that feedback from many people that are in the game. And whereas in some ways, some people that I have on the podcast, I just like what they talk about. I like how they present. I like the things that they've worked on. And then I get to sort of meet them. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong, but it's definitely no comparing my podcast to yours, where you get to know the story and then you're really peeling back the layer to explore this kind of biographical piece in a way, rather than a conversation where I just essentially get to pick someone's brain and then share it with more than just me.
Yeah. Well, you're doing important work. I mean, I'm astounded by, you must never sleep, because between the podcast and your writing and working and being a father and a husband, but you are, as I told you in the episode, the relentless optimist, but you are doing for law enforcement sort of what I'm trying to do in a very different way.
Yeah.
You are trying to lift up the profession. You are trying to help people enter the profession. I think that you're everywhere. I mean, everybody knows you. So you've done a remarkable job.
No, thank you so much. And I think that's where we do connect, is that purpose and passion is so aligned from different perspectives. And there's so much power in that. I think that oftentimes to help a project or let's say a movement, a lot of times it's the allies, it's our partners that can do as much or meaningful work as we can, right? It's one thing if a cop or a group of cops says this, that, and the other, but it's another if someone from outside is like, you know what? Guys, like this is what I see, and I'm just trying to share this thing. And so it offers a more objective perspective in a lot of ways. But I really appreciate that. I mean, sincerely, that's a huge compliment to me. I suppose when we talk about some of my experiences in when you interviewed me and some of these iconic moments, I suppose, in the course of my life and my career, a lot of it goes to legacy. That's the example of losing my friend Diego. That's a couple of my own close calls where it
Mhm.
really resonates with me to try to do as much with the time I have. And although that's offered me a lot of peace in some ways, I don't know if it's just because, where I'm at in my career and just past the midway point, if it's a full career, and I say if because I want people to recognize that we don't get to choose sometimes. I just want to do the best I can with what I have and just be a part of, and it's not just me. There's so many people that are supporting me literally as subordinates, like trying to, I suppose, like be in this collaboration. And they're teaching me just as much as I'm trying to teach them and everyone in this larger space, right? To leave, I suppose, leave the confines of just my department with who I get to see day to day, week to week, but then connect with so many professionals and individuals across the nation and into Canada. Like that's extremely phenomenal. And it's hard to grasp that this is even a thing that I'm participating in. So I'm very humbled by all that. And you're a huge piece of that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Abby, I wanted to share in a little bit of your story and coming into the project that you're doing. So you put in a lot of time, effort, passion into this, and as we have already detailed, like it offers this truly humanizing perspective because at the end of the day, cops are also people. We're
Yeah.
we're humans with our own mistakes, our own insecurities, our own just raw emotions that come into what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. And so I kind of wanted just to share with other folks a little bit about you and what the genesis for that was and where that comes from.
The wanting to support law enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've asked myself that so many times. I think a lot of it was this confluence of things. I had just moved to Seattle in 2006, and I had been in New York City during 9/11. And I can remember it was among my observations was that it was the first time I'd ever seen law enforcement thanked for anything. And I thought, why is that the case? And then I get out to Seattle, and within a few years, we have the shared tragedy of the ambush murders of 5 officers, Officer Timothy Brenton from the Seattle Police Department, who was shot and killed in his patrol car, his officer in training, Bert Kelly, who I've had on the podcast, survived. Yeah. And then the 4 Lakewood officers who you had felt a strong connection to. And the Lakewood 4 who were killed less than a month later, sitting in a coffee shop. And I do want to I always say their names: Officer Tina Griswold, Officer Ronald Owens, Sergeant Mark Renninger, Officer Gregory Richards. And I usually can't get through that without crying. But what I saw was people rising up in support of law enforcement because there was a tragedy. And my thought was, the support is there, but you can't only show it when there is a tragedy. You've got to show it every day. And so it started there. And I did a project to honor the fallen and to honor all law enforcement. It was a small thing. It was a sort of a photo interview exhibit that I did for the Seattle Police Department with their blessing, with their approval. And what happened was, in the process of interviewing officers, I was just captivated by the stories and the commitment and the sacrifice and the things that you have to see. Nobody knows this. I think it just built on itself. I thought every time I interviewed someone, I came away from it like, oh my God, and I'd come home with these stories in my head, and I would and I couldn't shake them. I would dream about it at night. And I said to my husband, they're telling me what happened and I can't shake it. They lived it. And so I think once I started, I couldn't stop, basically.
Yeah.
And then I'll let you, I won't keep
No,
But
you're great.
I went on to do other work then. I had a career in PR and publicity, and I used those skills to work with law enforcement. I produced awards banquets, and I also started a video production company where I filmed law enforcement. They were for training and recruiting purposes. And I did my first ride along. These recruiting videos were not like, guys with guns and fast cars and SWAT. They were, each one told a story. And so I was learning more and more about the profession.
Yeah. Yeah. You got a unique view. Absolutely. And there's one part I want to circle back to, and it's just that recognition that I suppose it's a nod to gratitude. Like, why is it only in the times of struggle and absolute tragedy that we are grateful? And it's not just law enforcement. I mean, we all feel this in our own personal circles, in our own, friends and families. Like when we lose someone, we're like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
why don't we say all these nice things when they're still here? Like,
Yeah.
why don't we take the time? And so this is a nod to all of us. And I love hearing this reminder from other people or other influences to say, hey, when you get done listening to this podcast or done listening to this or reading this blog, text 5 people, right? Call 3, like call somebody that you haven't talked to in 6 months. You're out of town or you just are busy. But busy is such a, and I hate
Yeah.
this, I want to get your take on this, but a little tangent. So often we talk to each other and we catch up, we're like, oh, how are things? And whether it's coworkers or best friends, I find myself, I hear other people saying, oh, life's busy. And it's become this kind of empty, this flurry of busy isn't good. It just means that you're caught up in the minutia.
Yeah.
And so I suppose this is a invitation for myself and everyone to join in this, like, let's just try to distance ourselves from the busy. Let's be productive, absolutely. However, let's be intentional. Let's take pause and really inject that where we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where my time goes.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, for my episodes, I do a lot of research and I write out the questions and I edit and I think about law enforcement probably 95% of the time. But you're right. It's just, and this isn't really where you were going. This is where my head went, is I'm connecting with people. And a lot of these officers have stayed my friends.
Yeah.
It's a, when someone shares, especially the way you did and the way a few others have, some very deep personal experiences. I've cried. My guests have cried. I've had officers tell me things that they haven't told their spouses.
Mm-hmm.
I had one guy who, former SPD, then went to San Diego, talked about the night of Tim's murder on Halloween and how he would never take off Halloween after that because he was supposed to work that night and he didn't. And his wife never, the survivor's guilt and had I been there, could I have done something? And so he never would work Halloween, but his wife never knew why.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. There's so much power in story, and you surely know that coming from your background, and you're such an expert at helping draw that out and build that for people. And I think that what you just explained about that officer is, it's what we know as survivor's guilt, right? And we know when it's outside of ourselves, we know that it's not fair, and we would want to shake our buddy, like grab him and be like, hey, like that's absolutely not the case, and don't allow yourself to put that on yourself. But when it's in our own psyche, whether or not we're aware of it, it just kind of overwhelms at times. And so, yeah, I'm not at all surprised that there are things like that come out in the interview, because it's a couple things. It's the format and people that come on or they talk about their experiences so many times, whether it's one of our shows or another kind of similar project. It's to share, to support and help others, right? It's to say, hey, I experienced this, and there are some lessons, there are some takeaways. Maybe it's, hey, this helped me, and then maybe someone's listening and being like, oh man, I'm gonna strictly avoid what Eric just said as far as like his coping mechanism at that time or his framework, right? And so, whereas like a lot of times it's hard, we don't want to share things with our spouses because we don't want to dump on them. I mean, I'll be first to admit, I dump on my wife a lot of stuff, and so she is so patient. I mean, that's one of the entry points of me actually seeking therapy after Diego's death, was a lot of my buddies saying that they were having good results, and they're like, hey, like you should talk to someone. I'm like, no, I'm good. even though I was like the peer support guy, right? I'm like the sergeant, like trying to run and coordinate and destigmatize these things. But then I realized that I was just talking to my wife like probably every day about Diego, and she was, she was there and super supportive. But at a certain point, I was like, man, I'm basically trying to make my wife my therapist, and we're just talking about it, but I'm not actually like progressing anywhere with it.
Well, and you said there's something you guys all say to each other, which is, "You good? Yeah, I'm
Mm,
good. You good? Yeah, I'm
mm,
good." And I don't know if you still do that, but I always want to say to all of you, maybe you should say, "How are you doing?"
yeah, yeah.
You good? Like you expect the response to be, "Yeah, I'm good."
Yeah.
What do
Yeah,
you think?
that's a fantastic. I mean, that could be like that's interview 101, whether it's a guest or whether it's, a friend or whether it's a suspect, but generally like a yes or no question is not going to generate a lot of response, right? Like, so you good? And it's a yes or no, and most people are going to take the path of least resistance, especially with something that they're uncomfortable with, right? So yeah, I'm good. Like, yeah, I'm good, boss, right? Like, move on. I like this where I heard at a wellness conference, the speaker suggested this system where you're like, hey, like, how are you 1 to 10? One being like awful, like you need to go home and like we need to like talk about some stuff. And then 10 being like, we won the lottery. And then so it puts it into plain terms. And this is also a suggestion for people at home, right? Talking to your spouse, your loved ones, your kids, but like 1 to 10, how are you right now? How was the day? Because then you have to pick a place, and then it gives you something to work off of.
Yeah, for sure. And we were talking before we started, that officer I was just talking about, former SPD, then San
Hmm.
Diego. He was one of my very first interviews, and I launched the podcast in September 2020 during the height of the riots.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they experienced in San Diego, we experienced in Seattle, but he was talking about he took down pictures of himself in his house from the academy. He couldn't go, he didn't want his kids talking about what he did for a living.
Mm,
Another King County Sheriff's guy that I talked to, he had a take home car, right? He couldn't show up at his kids' football games in his take home car. And so where I was going with that is, this started from what I told you about with the, getting into law enforcement with the tragedy,
yeah.
then having 10 years interviewed law enforcement. And then 2020 happens. And I'm in shock because, I mean, we all were, right? We had just gotten through COVID.
Hmm.
And for a minute there, law enforcement were sort of heroes and among the heroes. And then overnight, it all went to shit.
Hmm.
And so going back to, are you good? Nobody was good.
No.
Nobody. And what I was seeing was devastating, this psychological, psychic, emotional, physical attack on law enforcement. I thought to myself, I've got to do something. What can I do? I couldn't leave the house because it was COVID.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, I know how to interview. I know technology. I know some cops. I'm going to do a podcast. And podcasts weren't really a thing yet. I mean, they were kind of starting.
Yeah.
But I felt so helpless. And I thought, I have to give officers a safe place to talk about what's going on because it was unparalleled.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I love that story for a few reasons. One is this sense of helplessness, right? Like you see something, you see so much hurt, and you're like, oh, man, I want to do something. And oftentimes we feel so helpless. And I say we, even as law enforcement, even as first responders, like sometimes there's some systems and some environments and some cultures where you're just like, man, I want to do more. Like and I feel like I'm just idling or I'm doing this and it's not going anywhere. And that's not supposed to be like a specific commentary. That's just this kind of moral injury sometimes, or kind of this organizational like limitations, right? We got into this job, most of us all bright-eyed, like wanting to change the world and super idealistic. And we gotta try to nurture that passion still in just a more practical, pragmatic way as you learn what actually tends to happen, or like stay in your lane and recognize your locus of control. But I love how, in a time when so many people felt so overburdened and disempowered, like you're like, no, I mean, like even from the comfort, safety of my home, like you focus on what you did have, you focus on what you could do. You had networks, you had relationships, you had insight, experience to use technology, leverage these skills. And I love that. I think that there's so much lesson that we can gain from looking at other people's sense and awareness of agency.
Yeah. It's funny because in the beginning, I'm the civilian, and I learned early on the trust with law enforcement. So in the beginning, other cops didn't really have podcasts at that time. I mean, there might have been a few, but
Yeah.
I had to rely on my network, and I had to rely on, Eric Tung saying to Officer so-and-so, hey, she's okay. She's the real deal. You can talk to her. It was. And in the beginning, officers were not using their names or the names of their departments. And we talked again before we started how dangerous it was, especially in Seattle. People, not only officers were being attacked, people who supported law enforcement. I had a friend with a Thin Blue Line bumper sticker who got run off the road. It was, but I also don't want to focus on that time. It was about a year, and I dealt with all the issues: defund, abolish, all of the police reform, ridiculous police reform bills that are just tying the hands of law enforcement. It was very upsetting. But it has shifted. We did move into more storytelling. Now it is the stories of, and you said, going back to what you said, bright, shiny-eyed, want to save the world, as if that's a fantasy one. In fact, I think it's true. I think you all really, truly do save the world. I mean, you may lose sight of it, but every day you go out there and you put on that badge and that duty belt, or you're in your whatever unit you're in, you are out there saving the world, even if you don't feel that way. And I had written this is a version of what I said on my podcast and in my Instagram. But, I think that what's important is that to know that there are people that appreciate you. What I want to help you do with my podcast is to remember the wins, if I may be so bold, right? Yeah. There may be wins that you don't even know about. I mean, yes, saving somebody from a burning car, talking someone out of harming themselves. Those are rescue things, right? But I have had officers tell me on the podcast, and I have had civilians tell me that officer saved my life because he or she arrested me.
Yeah.
My life changed for the better because that officer arrested me. That officer may never know that. I mean, that officer may be you. Somebody's listening right now. Mm-hmm. You don't know that you arrested that person and then they got help.
Yeah.
I believe that you saved a life doing a traffic stop. It seems like a small thing. I also know it's one of the most dangerous things you can do. Yeah. You saved a life doing a traffic stop. You saved a life going lights and sirens to get to that call. You saved a life clearing a building, not knowing who is inside. And so, I want to help you look at the totality of what you are doing day by day, step by step. I see you, I hear you, I appreciate you. And it's all of you out there doing the job right now. It's those of you who have retired, what you gave of yourself and often continue giving in retirement. And then God bless, the people you speak to, the applicants, those of you looking to join the profession. God bless you. We need you.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. You hit a lot of points there. And I think that it is worth really focusing in on, right? We don't know all the things that happen downstream. Sometimes we get a couple that might stick out to us in our careers, but we don't know all the things that were averted, right? Some categorical ones that are easier for people to grapple with are, the DUI drivers, right? We know how dangerous impaired driving is. But at the same time, like I've pulled over a lot of really tired drivers that weren't that I thought were DUI. And you have to recognize, it's not just me, it's my example, but so many people do that. So many officers at night or during the day do that, right? The car swerving, you pull them over, you probably woke them way up and they realize they need to either pull over or they're going to be more alert and they can get to where they're going safely. Like how much that happens, downstream, and all the times we respond while something's about to happen or something happened that's bad and it didn't get worse. I know that that's a critique of law enforcement, is that, we go to, kind of pick up the pieces or figure out what happened. Well, a lot of times we go and something hasn't happened yet. There's the brewing dispute. and it doesn't become an assault where someone needs to get arrested and someone needs to go to the hospital, I mean, that's a good day. And so it's kind of, I try not to pay too much mind to, the trolls or like the instigators or the supposed the contrarians out there, but I do not want to shut them out because I do like to hear the critique and just try to process, okay, is there somewhere legitimate they're coming from? But it's hard to reconcile when it's just so overtly like, abolish or something
Yeah.
like that. When I was younger, actually, I was a cop, and I said, I thought police were a necessary evil in that wouldn't it be fantastic if there was a world where you don't need the police? Like, isn't that the goal? You just have maybe some people can address public safety, but there's no actual like violence. There's no actual intentional hurting or depriving of each other or victimization. Maybe there's accidents where, firefighters with, maybe a few more tools can handle it all right. There's public safety agencies, but all to say that that's the goal. And so sometimes it seems like the peanut gallery or the trolls are just like we think we need more cops just because it helps us. Like, no, hiring a bunch more cops doesn't make me more money. It doesn't give me more overtime. It actually gives me less. So way prefer just to be at home with my family, or truly like a world where we don't need so many cops. Like, it would be pretty fantastic.
Well, and you talk about the trolls and the part of, those people are kind of, I wouldn't say easy to ignore, but where they're coming from. Like, they're just being, but what I find more insidious and more difficult, and this is why another reason I do the podcast, is the negative narrative that seems to be accepted in society, particularly in the media. And the narrative has been hijacked. There is no true storytelling when it comes to law enforcement. I have done this, I say at the open of my podcast, I'm telling the real stories of law enforcement, the ones that don't make the news. And I do it because what I see is a noble profession that is misunderstood and few people try to understand it. And then, so you've got this assault that isn't even necessarily all that obvious. It's not a troll, but it's the New York Times. And the word choice and I did a whole episode on media bias and how the New York Times above the fold on a Sunday, I get so angry about how broken taillights lead to death. That's not the exact headline, but it was something like that. And they're blaming how officers handle traffic stops. Like every traffic stop ends in death. And I get so worked up.
Yeah.
Because throughout the entire piece, they are using words that appear to be fact when in fact they are opinion. And it is, so when you're an average normal civilian, you're reading this, it's the New York Times, so it must be true, right? But they don't have the whole picture.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to do is bring out the whole picture. And I've broken down incidents that I needed help understanding. I bring in my cop friends and say, okay, tell me what happened here. But we do it in a way that we're not attacking anybody. We're not attacking the officer. And this also speaks to the media coverage. I don't know if you remember the 96 shots, Dexter Reed in Chicago. He was in a car, in a vehicle, tinted windows. It was a TAC team. They had police.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't in uniform. But where I'm going with this is he ended up shooting at them, and so they fired back. But the headline in the New York Times and CNN, officers shoot 96 times. And it's not until the fourth paragraph that they say he shot first.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting worked up. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. And that speaks to how a lot of us feel and how we respond. We read these headlines. And then, when we step away from it, the media bias is something that should be addressed, because what their goal is not the goal of the community, is not the goal of everybody in it. The goal of the media is to sell more media, right? It's kind of that like adage, right? Like
clickbait.
Yeah, and it could be, yes, but the goal of us is to stay safe. And so when we read that, if we don't know, if let's just say we don't have a strong bias supporting law enforcement, then what are we to think? But, oh my gosh, like this is happening. Well, that's an issue, right? And so I think that most of us want cohesion. We want some sort of peace. We want to feel safe. However, because these notions are so prevailing, it is, as you said, absolutely insidious. That's a perfect word for it.
Well, and, other things that I've done that I feel really strongly about I did an episode when I was first working with law enforcement. I saw a documentary called Officer Involved by Patrick Shaver. I don't know if you know it.
I've heard of it.
It's a documentary. He was a former law enforcement officer, and he made a documentary about the impact of an officer-involved shooting, a deadly force encounter, on the officer. And I got to interview him, and it was one of the most emotional experiences for me because nobody talks about that, certainly not as a civilian and in the media. Like, it's always the officer was in the wrong. The office, why didn't you just, if I could just stop people from saying, why didn't you just shoot him in the hand? Why didn't you just shoot the knife out of his, shoot him in the knee, shoots the knife out of his hand? But it speaks to not even just the incident itself, but what you face every time you go out there on any given day, what could happen. I mean, you were an officer-involved shooting. The impact on the officer is not something anyone ever talks about. And I felt it was so important to cover. And so when you see these things in the media and you see the attacks on law enforcement, when it might be a very, very well may be a justified shooting, that poor officer, those law enforcement is attacked, that officer is attacked, and that officer might be crumbling inside because of what he or she just had to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of this headline that was shared by some headline and then the news clips, right? And it was relatively recent. It was in Boston, but there's an officer-involved shooting where it was, anyone reading the article would recognize it was justified. However, the camera was just panning to, politician after politician offering condolences to the person who was killed and his family. And so,
exactly.
Whereas we could get, really in the weeds of like, oh my gosh, should they be doing that? And like, well, what about the officer? Like, yes, that is really hard for those that are in or alongside law enforcement and sympathetic to law enforcement to see that. But think about what that does to the officer and the family. Like, we can just say, yeah, write them off. They're politicians or it's the media, whatever. We know what we did. But it does signal, like, we put a certain amount of trust in our political leaders. We put a certain amount of trust in the media. Like, we are giving them our attention and our credibility, like, or else we just wouldn't turn it on. We just shut it all off. But we don't collectively as a society. So it is very pervasive, and it is, saying this is also saying something else. And that's what's really, I think, damaging and really corrosive to a lot of people that put it all out there. And I think through this whole conversation, I do like to say sometimes, like, I don't want people to treat us like heroes. I don't want, and I think a lot of officers feel the same. Like, we are doing a job. We know why we're doing it. And we have to recognize that, like, I am proud of some heroic acts I was a part of in a team, right? Like, I don't think that pride is a bad thing. I think with a governor and an awareness, like, you should be proud of some great things that you do and some great values that you hold. However, like, I don't want a parade. I just want understanding. And I think that's what's so beautiful about your project, is offering a lens through which people can better, if they're willing, because you have to be willing, you have to be intentionally open to allow yourself to feel and build some level of empathy. I think, and we should do the same. We should do the same for, I call them trolls. I'm already name calling, which is not the best example, but I think people get what I'm saying. If someone feels such a way, then I'm trying to consider where they're coming from so I can utilize that as a piece to inform me how to do my job better, because my job is not about convincing anyone. It's just to serve everybody. However, I do also recognize that some people that say those things, they're literally just trying to light the world afire, right? Light the world ablaze. Their goal is actually may not be anything about the police, but just to get everyone just to be fearful and then, fear monger and build upon that. And some people want, and it's like that line that Alfred says in The Dark Knight, like, some people just want to watch the world burn. And
yeah.
I absolutely believe that's the case.
Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Abby, thank you for sharing all that. I know that you have an anecdote, a little kind of feedback, some notes from a listener, and I'd love that. I haven't heard it, but I'd love you to share it as far as like something to your project.
Okay. So I thought this was important, and it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but I'm not. Officer wrote, it was actually an Apple podcast review, and he wasn't an officer at the time. He wrote, "This podcast solidified my desire to be an officer. I came to this podcast honestly to find a reason that would make me not want to do the job. I wanted to hear the worst of the worst about the job to know if I truly wanted it or not. This podcast is why I'm applying now. I highly recommend it for people on the fence to listen to this podcast." And then to your point about trolls and not understanding and being an open mind. My girlfriend was an all cops are bad cops kind of person when we met. She has now completely changed her opinion and supports me 100%. This podcast helped me find a way to express the necessity of the job and the media's assault on society by making police the enemy. I am now compiling a list of episodes I think really hit home for her to listen to. And there's so much in there. It's, part of the goal is to make law enforcement feel supported. It's a big part of the goal. I think there's a level of catharsis that officers have when they talk to me. There's a level of catharsis when you listen to another officer's story. But I also want to get to those people who, like this guy's girlfriend, who will change their mind, I can convert one person, but also if I can inspire one person to become a police officer. I've had other, a couple other people say they listened to the podcast and decided they're going to apply.
Yeah.
That to me is the ultimate.
Yeah. That's so powerful, man. I'm so excited by that review because props to that individual, right? That said, yeah, I wanted this to be confirmation bias, perhaps to push me away. And I think that there's so much that we can all take on. I mean, that's a conscientious intention to like throw yourself into the discomfort and then see what comes out, and to have this resolve and this deep belief in what you're doing. I think that's so powerful. And I think that those check-ins, those gut checks are so helpful for all of us in whatever we're doing. Like when it gets hard, like you got to pause and ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? And that's where I've reflected. Even getting in recruiting was such a gift. I didn't think it would be in the way. I thought I was going to do the impossible, or I was getting into the impossible role, and I perceived failing just so I could make sure I did everything to prevent that. And I didn't think that we'd have the success that we did as quickly as we did, probably because of that attitude and my team being with me in that. However, the fortunate gift that I didn't expect was renewing my resolve and why I was doing it, right? Like to hear so many people in why they wanted to do the job. And a lot of times it came from a very, very raw personal place, as it does for most of us in one way or another. It reminded me why I was there. And then just to be able to foster that and just be a part of their journey. And that's what I see in this example. Like you got to help someone be a part of their journey in potentially their life's work, or a huge piece of their life's work. If this is one piece of their service that they put out in the world while they're doing this career, then that's fantastic. And then to parlay that into the relationship with the girlfriend, like that's amazing. I mean, you don't accomplish that by just telling someone they should trust or like the cops more. So I love that.
Yeah. If I could bottle everything I've covered over the last 4 years into one statement that people can use to say, but you can't. It's like it's taken me 4 years to, and I wish that I could change people's minds, but maybe I'm doing a little bit of that.
Yeah, you absolutely are. And I appreciate so much your example. And, you say that, I think the same, right? It's like, okay, can we get this in an episode? Can we get this in a blog? Can we get this in an article? And the thing is, like, you can't, because some of the most meaningful things take so much time. And they take so much time, and they also take the desire from the other side, right? So no one can force eyes upon something to agree or comprehend it, or ears open, right? It has to be the actual desire to try to consider that. And Abby, this is such a fantastic experience for me to reconnect. I'm so happy to be able to share you and your story and your project with more folks. Is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with? And please tell them again where they can find you and on being a police officer.
Sure. I mean, the thing I was just thinking is many times I've talked with officers about their why. I don't know if you're tired of hearing that phrase if you're in law enforcement.
No, I think you need it, yeah.
But, I do always ask, what drew you to law enforcement? And to a person, almost everyone says it was a calling. And although everyone says, I just want to help people who are in need of our help. And if the rest of the world could just see that, that is what law enforcement is. So I will leave you with that thought. And I am findable on all podcast platforms. The podcast is called On Being a Police Officer. Check out episode 47, my interview with Eric Tong, who is then a sergeant. And I have a website. I can give you the links, on beingapoliceofficer.com.
Great. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Hey, Grit Nation. I got a couple things I'm really excited to share with you. The first is that the free newsletter, is now live. All you got to do is go to bluegritwellness.com to subscribe. It is basically a summary of everything good and gritty for the week, including some exclusive content specifically on the newsletter. That'll include wellness information, nutrition, things that you ask, Q&A, as well as updates about Blue Grit, offerings, news, things that'll help you out. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.